Hello, welcome to Confessions of a Frustrated Game Master. I am Robert the Narrator, and thank you for joining me for another episode of Confessions. So, this episode will be another in my series of top 10 favorite RPGs of all time. This will be game number 7 on my list. I don't have a physical copy of the game present, but I do own it digitally. I was considering having it printed out by Lulu.com or another one of those print-on-demand services so I can have a physical copy. So I don't have one here to show you, but the game that is number 7 on my top 10 favorite RPGs of all times is Shadowrun. Yes, Shadowrun is a classic RPG. I have loved it for a very long time. Before I get into explaining what Shadowrun is, I want to talk about one of my other favorite RPGs of all time, which was Eclipse Phase. And a fellow RPG vlogger, Ivan Mike, really found it interesting and went out and purchased, I guess it was probably the PDF of the game. He contacted me on Facebook and we had a discussion about the game. And I feel really bad because being a little bit familiar with the type of games that Ivan Mike likes, I know that Eclipse Phase was a game that would probably be too rules heavy for him. It's too rules heavy for me at this point. It's a game that I played 7 or 8 years ago. And part of my top 10 favorite RPGs is that they are not reviews. They are more just discussions of why I believe those games are awesome. And as you probably can imagine, some of those games are fairly old and I have moved on or my tastes have changed. But I don't reflect that in my top 10 favorite RPG of all time series. So what I'm going to do, because I felt so bad about Ivan Mike picking up the game when I have moved, even though I love the game and it affected me in profound ways, I guess you could say, I don't play it anymore. I wouldn't play the system. I love the setting. And I think that I know that Ivan Mike, the system would be too rules heavy for him. So I really feel bad. So I am going to enact what I call the Ivan Mike protocols. At the end of, from now on, for my top 10 favorite RPGs of all time, I'm going to tell you whether or not I still would play or like or how I feel today about all of these games, because though they had a real impact in the hobby for me, not all of the games that are on my top 10 favorite RPGs of all time lists will I still play, because that a lot of them come from earlier in the hobby when things were a lot more rules heavy, and I've kind of moved to a rules medium style in my gaming. So the Ivan Mike protocols, I'm putting that in force, and at the end of the episode I'm going to let you know if whether or not I still play Shadowrun. So let's talk about Shadowrun. So Shadowrun is an RPG that was released by FASA in 1989. What drew me to Shadowrun? Of course, I'm talking about the first edition of the game. Well, to be quite honest with you, because it has been so many years, I couldn't tell you what drew me to Shadowrun. The cover of Shadowrun is iconic and I think very evocative. And I have to say that maybe I was in a game store and I saw it on the shelf and it immediately grabbed my attention, or I saw it in a gaming magazine and I saw the cover and the cover just grabbed me, that it made me interested in the game. And then of course investigating the game or looking at an ad or flipping through the book, I was stunned to find a mixture of elements of fantasy and sci-fi and the cyberpunk genre all mashed up together, and I hadn't seen it before, and I was hooked. I was drawn to Shadowrun. So don't remember all of the details, but I have to imagine that those are the things that caught me, and the art. If you see the art, it's gorgeous, and I reminisce very fondly about the art of Shadowrun. You know, very very 80s, early 90s style art. It's fantastic. It just takes me back to when I was younger. Man, it's fantastic. So that's really what drew me, I think, to Shadowrun. So, what is Shadowrun about? Well, it is a game about industrial espionage in the future, 2050 to be exact. The world is heavily controlled by corporations, and those corporations need mercenaries to do their dirty work. And the mercenaries in the world of Shadowrun are called Shadowrunners. And a Shadowrun is a mission of corporate espionage, or a covert mission that the player characters perform for other organizations, even criminal organizations, not just corporations. So that is what Shadowrun is all about. Shadowrunners, mercenaries, performing missions for corporations or organizations in the dark. That's what Shadowrun is all about. So, what is the setting of Shadowrun? But so, as I mentioned, Shadowrun occurs several decades in the future. The first edition of Shadowrun took place in 2050. The Shadowrun RPG is in its fifth or sixth edition. I played first edition, and I have played fourth edition. So I've played those editions. I didn't really play any of the other ones, but first edition is really what I started with, and really is what affected me. First edition starts in 2050. Is our world when magic re-emerges, and some humans in our population start to experience what's called goblinization. Out of nowhere, humans would turn into orcs or trolls, or humans would be born as elves or dwarves, and then other fantastical creatures like dragons and other magical creatures would come back into existence. And also, the indigenous peoples of North America realize that their ceremonies allow them to control powerful spirits. This is happening against a backdrop where technology has advanced greatly, where human beings are able to implant cyberware into their bodies, and where the Matrix, essentially an internet system that human beings are able to neurally interface with, is very, very prevalent. So Shadowrun is this mixture of genres, science fiction, cyberpunk, a little bit of horror, and fantasy, all meshed together to create this incredibly fun and, at the time, very unique setting that has enjoyed a lot of popularity in the hobby for many, many years. And that is the world of Shadowrun. If you look at some of the illustrations, you see shaman, you see magic users, you see what they call street samurais, individuals, mercenaries who have implanted cyberware into their bodies to make them the ultimate mercenary fighting machines. It's all quite fantastic, and I really love the Shadowrun setting. It was like nothing I had ever seen back in those days. Now, what are the mechanics of Shadowrun? Well, the Shadowrun is a D6 based system. You have stats like quickness and body and so forth, and those stats are rated with a certain number of six-sided dice. And then you have skills, which also are rated from 0 to 6. And you roll the dice when you're going to take an action, and you're going against a target number anywhere from 2 to 10, because in the first edition of the game you could have some tasks that are really, really difficult, like 7, 8, or 9, and the D6 would explode. So if you had a task that had a target number of 8, you would have to roll a 6 on your pool of dice from your skills. And if you have a 6, you re-roll it, you add it to the total to try to get those higher numbers. Each individual die counted against the target number so that you can have multiple successes. So it's a fairly easy system. Now, the combat system, however, is not so easy. And I'm not going to go over the combat system in this review, but to kind of give you a preview, Shadowrun is a very rules-heavy system, and in order to prepare for this episode, I went through and read the first edition rules, and the damage system, which I had always liked, because I guess I'll give you a brief description. Essentially, you have a damage number and I believe a letter that represents how severe the damage was, and the armor would shift the damage down to a less severe variety of damage. But I tried to read the first edition rule book, and I couldn't make hind nor tail of the damage rules. So I really couldn't get into any more detail. What I would like to say is one thing that has always been a standout for me for the Shadowrun role-playing game is I loved the character creation process, because the first time I had ever seen anything like this. During the character creation process, you build your character by prioritizing a few categories: magic, attributes, skills, wealth, and race. 5 categorizations from 0 to 4. The higher the number you add to a category, the better it is. So to give you an example, if you were going to play a non-human race, you would have to put a 4 under your race so that you could benefit from the racial abilities of your particular race. Or if you were going to be a magic user, you would have to put it under priority 3 or 4 in order to be a magic user. So essentially, the higher priority you put into the different categories, for instance, attributes or skills or wealth, the higher priority you give to wealth, the more new yen, that's what they call the money in the Shadowrun universe, the more new yin you would start with, or if you put a higher priority, if you decided to be a human and put a higher priority of skills, you would have more skill points. So that's the first time I had seen a system break a character down: magic, attributes, skills, wealth, and race, and tell the player, hey, prioritize what's important to your character, and that's how you're going to determine how many points you have for skills, how many points you have for attributes, how much money you start with, whether or not you're a human or a metahuman, or whether or not you're a magic user. And I really always love that about Shadowrun's character creation process. It's really cool. It's one of the things that I love about the game more than anything else. So that's really awesome and really cool. So I guess the final part of the episode is going to be the Ivan Mike protocol. Yes, right now I'm going to tell you if Shadowrun is a game that I would play today. And to be quite honest with you, today, Shadowrun is not the type of game that I would play. The current edition of Shadowrun, the previous editions of Shadowrun are too rules heavy. The first edition of the game is from 1989, and I would never play a game so rules heavy these days. As quality as the games are, as great as the setting is, I just couldn't do it. So that is it for this episode of Confessions of a Frustrated Game Master. Thank you for checking out this episode, and good morning or good evening wherever you are. Thank you very much.